Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. John Keir here with you again on another solo episode talking about quarterbacks today. Always interesting to talk about quarterbacks, and the Steelers, as you know, have Ben Roethlisberger back at the helm for the 2021 season, and three current backup quarterbacks on the roster in Mason Rudolph, Joshua Dobbs, and the new addition, Dwayne Haskins. It is Season 6, Episode 8 today, and I know that the Steelers currently have 4 guys under contract, so it looks very likely that the Steelers will not be adding another quarterback, but you never know what happens. The Steelers could theoretically cut Dwayne Haskins before the draft. Someone could get injured. Hopefully not, but you never know what happens. So, with that in mind, I figured it would be important for us to do our due diligence. Since it's more than likely that there could be 5 first-round quarterbacks gone before the Steelers even make a selection, we think it unlikely the Steelers will take one, but if they did, we tried to map out 6 different players the Steelers could take. So I am here looking at 3 different guys in Kyle Trask from Florida, Kellen Monde from Texas A&M, and Sam Ellinger from Texas. So, a quick overview of the roster at the quarterback position right now. Obviously, Ben Roethlisberger returning for his 18th NFL season at age 39. Most likely the last ride for him. Now, I wouldn't completely rule it out that he comes back, that he ends up coming back in 2022, but I think it's unlikely. It's certainly possible to assume that his decline has begun and will continue to decline over the course of this season and any coming seasons he plays. This will be his final chance, more than likely, to win and win significantly. Whether or not he will or how likely that is up for discussion, of course, but that is the thought process with the team. And I thought prior to the last month and a half of the season, he was playing very well last year, and I think that many would agree, even though his final numbers probably don't tell the whole story about how he struggled down the stretch, including a very ugly performance in Cincinnati on a fateful Monday night back in December. I thought he overall had a pretty solid season considering he was 38 coming off of a major elbow surgery. So there's still a lot to be excited about with him. A new offense, maybe utilizing more play action. I think it could still be a good year for Ben. I don't think it's outrageous to assume that he has a nice season where he continues to improve as well. So even though he might be declining a bit, I'm hoping the offense will do more things that makes life easier for him, which in turn will let him play better. So even though he's physically regressing, you don't notice it as much on the field. Behind him, the Steelers have right now the 2 quarterbacks they had on the roster last year with Ben in Mason Rudolph and Joshua Dobbs. Obviously both very familiar with the offense as 2017 and 2018 draft picks. Dobbs, I wouldn't say his position is necessarily secure, but again, he's knowledgeable. He helps Ben Roethlisberger on the sideline. He's a good athlete. Definitely not a bad number 3 quarterback in my opinion, with some limited playing time. I think he's a good guy to have, at least competing for the number 3 job. Mason Rudolph, the clear number 2 in his final year with the Steelers, most likely. Thought of possibly as the heir to Ben Roethlisberger, but I find it more and more unlikely. Rudolph is a pretty solid quarterback. I think he showed in the finale against Cleveland last year that he's got some potential to be maybe even a low-level starter in the NFL. But considering the Steelers took him possibly with the intention of succeeding Ben Roethlisberger, it will be interesting to see that both him and Ben walk out the door potentially after this season. And the newcomer, Dwayne Haskins, a former first-round pick with the Washington football team a full 2 seasons ago. Haskins never lived up to the billing in Washington, got into some trouble while playing for the team, and never really took any steps to get better and ended up getting cut, despite the fact that he was on a really cheap deal and wasn't claimed by anybody. So, Haskins is a long shot to make the roster, I think, given the familiarity of Dobbs and Rudolph with the team. But who knows? Maybe Haskins can prove himself. It should be a pretty interesting quarterback room going into this season. And at the very least, until the start of the season, you have insurance in case someone gets hurt, with 4 quarterbacks that have played in the NFL. So with that being the case, I already mentioned the 3 guys I'm looking at today. So, why don't I get right into things? Talking about Florida quarterback Kyle Trask, who has been compared a lot to Mason Rudolph at 6'5" and 240 pounds. Is that a fair comparison? Well, I mean, I guess we'll find out, right? So, in my tape evaluation of him, Trask is a guy that didn't really start many games in high school and was only a major starter the last 2 seasons. 2 years ago having what I'd call an adequate average season, and then this past season really taking a big leap as his overall touchdown numbers almost doubled, and he threw for over 1,300 more yards last year than he did 2 years ago in the same amount of games. Trask was a pretty accomplished guy, bringing home my apologies, I was reading the wrong thing. He was a second-team All-American and a second-team All-SEC winner, and was a finalist for the O'Brien Award his final season on campus. To start, I want to talk about some of the more impressive things I saw from Kyle Trask on tape. And one thing that really stood out to me was his ability to command the offense and work through progressions. That's something that used to be considered very important in quarterbacks transitioning to the NFL. I don't know if it's as important as it used to be, but if you're looking for a guy that can step in and take command and be a guy that really understands what's going on, Kyle Trask is a guy that can do that. And he does a really good job of working through his reads in both a timely and efficient manner at Florida. He didn't get caught sticking to one read very often, and the only times I felt like he was sticking on a guy or locking onto a guy was when he knew that play was going to come open and it was well designed. So I thought that Kyle Trask working through progressions was very good, and again, a knowledgeable guy in the offense, smart player. That's something you like to see. Gives you a good floor, a good baseline for a player going to the NFL. Another good part of his game was his ability to manage the pocket, his presence, his poise in the pocket. I thought this was easily his best trait. His movement within the pocket, very strong. Eluding pressure in the pocket, being able to move. Everyone talks about how Tom Brady isn't a great athlete. However, he moves in the pocket so well that he evades rushes. He doesn't get hit very often. It's very similar with Kyle Trask. Obviously, he's not near the level of Tom Brady in this regard, but he's no slouch in that manner either. His ability to recognize pressure, feel the play, how it's developing, feel what's going on around him, and put the right throw on the money when he needs to. He is fantastic. He understands what's going on back there, and that he has to get things done in an efficient manner. Oof. And finally, I thought he, from everything I saw, he was an efficient, not just an efficient player, but a really good leader on and off the field for the Florida Gators. He was the centerpiece, the leader of an offense that has produced multiple first-round picks and will continue to produce multiple NFL players this season as well, with guys like Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney. I meant to say multiple NFL players. I don't know if they've had multiple first-round picks the last couple of years. However, he's had a bunch of weapons around him, and I was really excited from what I saw on tape because I came into this with a bit of negative bias. Okay, last season, my favorite receiver coming out was Van Jefferson, one of Trask's receivers. Austin's favorite receiver from that year was Freddie Swain, another one of his receivers. This year, he has Kadarius Toney and Kyle Pitts, who is one of the best players in the entire draft. And yet I came away from his tape not thinking that Trask was necessarily out of place or that they were carrying him. One trait that I thought was interesting is that Trask was aggressive. And I don't mean throwing into double coverage per se or just throwing deep for the sake of throwing deep. There were times in games in the competitive SEC where you have to make chunk plays, and I don't think it's a bad thing that Trask decided to throw some bigger jump balls up for a guy like Kyle Pitts. He knows he's got a great future NFL player on his offense. Why not let him go up and make plays? Even though it's probably not what the conventional quarterback would do, I love that he did that. I think that that's something that's transferable to the NFL, and when you have a backup quarterback come in, yeah, you want him to play safe, but you need to have him be able to make throws like that too, to be able to give guys a chance to make a play, and he does. So, obviously, I thought that was a pretty good thing to see from him. Two clear negatives with Kyle Trask. Number one is his mobility. So Mac Jones has been talked about a lot as a guy that's not mobile, but he's at least somewhat functional in terms of his mobility. Kyle Trask really is immobile. His 40 time was not even a sub 5 second flat. It was in a low percentile for quarterbacks in terms of 40-yard dashes over the past few seasons. I forget where exactly it ranked. And I know I just talked about his movement within the pocket being pretty strong, but in terms of just running, it's not great. I was frankly shocked to see how often Florida used him on designed runs. I think that's a bit questionable. He ran with passion and desire, ran hard though, so I'll give him that. But in terms of running out and making plays, he's not going to be able to do it. So making plays outside of structure is not going to be his strength, which is increasingly becoming a big part of today's NFL. Secondly, his arm strength leaves a lot to be desired. Not horrible by any means. I just mean that he's not going to zip a bunch of passes in there over the middle. I felt very similar to what I saw from Mason Rudolph in college. He can get the ball wherever you want to. He's an effective deep ball thrower. But the issue isn't distance, it's velocity. It's evident on tape that his passes lack zip that other guys like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence and definitely Zach Wilson have. He got away with it in college. It'll be harder for him to get away with that in the NFL level. So you're talking a couple of big things that he's not great in, and now you understand why he's not considered a first-round quarterback. But, that being said, I still liked a lot of what I saw. To sum up, I thought he had an impressive progression from 2019 to 2020. He's got good intangibles. He has an aggressive mindset to let his playmakers do what they do, maneuvers the pocket well, and has good mechanics from a clean pocket. I think that his ceiling is that of a non-mobile Ryan Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick doesn't have the strongest arm. It's a little bit stronger in terms of he can zip passes in there, but he's never been a high-level starter other than for a handful of weeks in a season before he goes back to his career normal. I think that you could see Kyle Trask produce solid weeks, solid games, solid seasons with the right supporting cast around him. His cons, A, is obviously he's not mobile. He's got a weaker arm comparatively to his peers. He is somewhat inaccurate on short passes, which is concerning. He played with a loaded offense and is lacking a clear, defining physical trait that makes him stand out. I think that his floor is that of a discount Blaine Gabbert. And by that I mean a guy that doesn't have the same expectations as a former top 15 first-round pick had in Blaine Gabbert, but only sticks around as a backup, and the limited starting experience he has is not all that great. So that's what I mean by discount Blaine Gabbert. He's a projected second to third round pick, and an unlikely story, based on his playing time in high school, to do what he's done. Very impressive, becoming a record holder at Florida for passing touchdowns in a season. Reminds me a lot of Mason Rudolph, as I've already said. I think he can stick around in the league for a number of years. Unfortunately, it will be hard for him to become a long-term starter, barring a good supporting cast. He just doesn't have any defining physical traits that help you stand out when everything else around you isn't perfect. I think Trask would be worth a shot for a team with an uncertain future at quarterback like the Chicago Bears, but with the Steelers currently in win-now mode, I wouldn't want to take Trask unless if he somehow falls to round 4 or 5, and then even then, you have to think about it. But if it were 2022, might be a different story. But all in all, I think that Trask could be a good backup. Just the Steelers have no need for one right now. Next on my list, I have Texas A&M quarterback Kellen Monde. Monde was a guy standing at 6'3" and 217 pounds, a 4-year starter at Texas A&M. You don't see that super often. Set a bunch of records at Texas A&M over the course of his career in 47 games and 44 starts, becoming the Aggies' all-time leader in total offense, passing yards, passing touchdowns, completions, and attempts. A very accomplished career at Texas A&M. Monde is a guy that has a lot of things to like, but never really took the steps that were expected of him in his college career. So it's leaving some to wonder if he's going to be able to do it at all. So let me get right into that right now. I'm going to start with the negatives on Monde. I think that would be a little bit easier to describe the picture of what NFL teams are going to be looking at, just in terms of a guy that, even though he was very accomplished, there's still a few issues to work out. Number one has to be his accuracy, and that is the fact that it was never a strong point. He battled together a career completion percentage of just 58.5, and the general thought is that your completion percentage drops 5 to 10 points in the NFL. So for him, that having it be that low already is a pretty big concern. And even though he was able to get better in terms of his overall completion percentage and adjusted completion percentage, it's still far off where it needed to be. Furthermore, this past season, according to PFF, his percentage of accurately thrown passes dropped to 53.4% last season. And considering how infrequently he pushes the ball down the field, this is a big concern. So I want to talk about that aggressive, non-aggressive mindset. Ben Roethlisberger, over the past season, I'm going to try to paint this for you. Ben Roethlisberger last season, really over the last few years, but last season especially, was a big proponent of the dink and dunk offense. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. I'm here to tell you right now that unless if you're Drew Brees or Tom Brady or a very accurate quarterback like that can be extremely precise, it is quite hard to make a living in the NFL doing that. And Monde did that in college. However, you're not going to have a bunch of big plays doing that. And when you're not as efficient as those guys, you're wasting opportunities. You might be able to go 5 for 7 or 5, let's just say 5 for 9 for 50 yards. But you could also go 2 for 4 for 50 yards too if you're pushing the ball down the field. And in just 2 plays, you've gotten as far as you did in 9 plays, and by dinking and dunking down the field. The point is, if you're pushing the ball down the field a bit more, you can offset your inaccurate problems by coming up with explosive plays. And that doesn't necessarily have to be 20 yards down the field, but it could also be an instance of just getting more than just the throw short, run long type of situation. If you're going to be doing that, you have to be very efficient. And Monde is the opposite of that. Ben Roethlisberger was somewhat efficient, but not efficient enough to make it worth it, not in terms of the metrics. And Monde is very similar. So his accuracy concerns are a problem, and it's compounded by the fact that he rarely pushes the ball down the field. Again, that has something to do with his decision-making, which I highlighted as another negative here. His turnover-worthy play percentage, according to PFF, was 3.2%, which is not terrible, but that number rose from his first 2 seasons. He struggles with putting the ball in harm's way at times, and just not just through the air, really. He runs the ball a lot, and he fumbled a few times on tape, and that was concerning to see. So decision-making is a bit questionable at times, as is ball security. And finally, his mechanics, which plays into his accuracy, is something that's a work in progress. Based on what you see on the stats with his completion percentage, and then you look at the way he plays, you can understand why there's some work that needs to be done in this area. He has an awkward throwing motion. I don't know if he can ever be a pinpoint accurate type of guy, but I have to think that he's going to get some sort of work with a quarterback coach with the team he gets to, because right now it just feels like he's leaving stuff on the field with a strange and awkward throwing motion. But again, that's not the magic fix, you know? So maybe he just never will be a very fluid passer. Phillip Rivers had a very odd throwing motion. On the plus side, though, the things I really liked of what I saw from him, number one, the thing that sticks out is his mobility. A very interesting case of an athlete that seemed to be a decent athlete on tape, but tested really well in terms of his 40-yard dash. He was in the 95th percentile for quarterbacks in the 40-yard dash over the last few seasons at 4.59 seconds. He was used to help in the running game on designed runs, option plays, and was able to extend plays by rolling out of the pocket, or could just scramble for yards if he needed to. This was a very good part of his game in college, and it's still something that he could probably be a little bit cleaner with in terms of ball security, but he's fast enough to be able to do it at the NFL level and should be able to use it to help raise the floor of the offense whenever he's running it. So that's very good to see. You see a lot of teams doing that nowadays too, install these mobile quarterbacks. Another thing I was impressed with was his pocket management. Similarly to Kyle Trask, though not quite as well, I thought Monde did a good job of navigating the pocket and recognizing what was going on around him. He only got sacked 8 times in his final season at Texas A&M, and I know he was playing with a great offensive line. I know. However, it's important to note that more often than not, quarterbacks are responsible for sacks more than the collective offensive line is. So, the fact that he only got sacked 40 times as the majority starter for the past 4 seasons is very impressive, even with a great offensive line. So that's something that's worth mentioning. Overall, when it comes to Kellen Monde, I thought his strengths were that he was a really good athlete at the quarterback position, started over 40 games in the SEC, and was a 4-year starter. He played in a pro-style offense at Texas A&M, was rarely sacked, and put up really good numbers despite not being an aggressive down-the-field passer. I see his ceiling as a undersized and poor man's Colin Kaepernick, in the sense that he doesn't have as great of an arm. Kellen Monde definitely has a higher floor, and that's something that's obviously quite encouraging. His cons, though, and his floor, again, he never put it all together in college. He never took the big steps he was expected to take. Accuracy, huge problem. Improved, but still far off where it needs to be. Not the best decision maker. Fumbled on running plays and turned the ball over too much. And again, it's been a theme. Didn't push the ball down the field as much as he could have or should have. I see his absolute floor is as a more mobile Geno Smith. And Geno Smith, I know you laugh at it, but Geno Smith has been in the NFL for, I want to say 6-7 years now. He's carved out a decent career, and a more mobile version of that is more friendly to the NFL today. All in all, Kellen Monde was supposed to be a breakout player the last 2 years, making the next step from solid college starter to legit college star, but he never made those leaps. So that leaves everyone with just more questions. Why didn't he take those steps? Will he ever do it in the NFL? He has talent. It's undeniable. But there are many questions as to whether or not he can do it. I keep hearing about a high upside, and I suppose that he does, but I don't think it's likely he's ever going to get there. If he did, you have to keep asking, why didn't he do it at Texas A&M? Is it just the offense? Why is he not breaking through the way everyone thinks he should have? Either way, I think he should be a quality backup with mobility that can bring the floor of his offense to a higher level, and therefore could have a decent shot at being maybe a mid-level starter in the NFL. I like what I see from him. A round 3 to round 5 projection seems pretty accurate to me. A quarterback-needy team is going to get a solid player in Kellen Monde, who should be around the NFL for a number of years. Finally, I'm going to wrap things up with talking about Texas quarterback Sam Ellinger. Ellinger was also a longtime starter at Texas throughout his college career. Ellinger, this is actually pretty wild looking back at his bio here. His father died in 2013 after a triathlon, which is kind of wild to think about. But that didn't stop Ellinger from fulfilling his dream as becoming the Texas Longhorns starting quarterback. And after being named the Texas Player of the Year in 2015, he ended up committing to Texas. Despite only starting 6 games in his freshman season, he never looked back the rest of the way, starting 43 of 46 games over the course of his career, winning 27 games and being named a captain 2 separate times throughout the course of his career, throwing 94 touchdown passes, 94, and running for another 33. He was a big-time winner and player at Texas over the course of his career, and now he looks to go pro. So let's talk a little bit about what I liked from Sam Ellinger. I'll be honest with you. I didn't like a lot from what I saw from Sam Ellinger. And it's nothing personal. I've watched him over the course of the past few seasons. But similarly to Kyle Trask, but a lighter version of him, in the sense that he's just absent a lot of physical traits that you want to see. A couple things I did like from what I saw of him, though, is, number one, his decision-making was very strong. Ellinger had a very low turnover-worthy play percentage, and while that in itself is good, you also have to take into account the fact that he throws the ball over the middle of the field more than most quarterbacks coming out of this draft class. Throwing in the middle of the field is considered the danger zone of a passing offense, and yet he did so often and did so effectively. Between the hash marks, he actually graded in an above-average fashion within 12 yards. He made some questionable decisions as far as when to run or bail out of pockets, which doesn't make him a complete player in this regard. But when it comes to overall decision-making in terms of passing the ball, I thought that he did a really good job. He finished with 27 interceptions in his career, but only one season did he have more than 7. So, overall, very good at taking care of the ball. And lastly, this has to be mentioned, is that he's a great leader. A former two-time captain of the Longhorns. He's a leader, will be a good team player, and knows how to rally the offense and team around him. He would always take a hit when the team needed him to, always willing to make a play when his team needed to make a play. He can get involved in hero ball too much, as was the case last season, but this is a guy you want on your team. This is a guy that's good for the locker room. The downside, though, there is something to mention. First of all, with his mobility, because it was a huge asset in college. It's solid, but despite the fact that all we can think about with Sam Ellinger is him running around all the time in college, the fact remains he actually did not test all that well in terms of a runner, in terms of his overall straight line speed at the Texas Pro Day. Ellinger ran a 4.84, which was ranked in the 42nd percentile in terms of quarterbacks over the past few seasons. So while he's not slow by any means, he's not nearly as fast as his tape might suggest. Texas used him in some cases as, a running back. A lot of designed runs. He was a tough runner, and he was effective when asked to do so. But I don't see him being asked to do so very often in the NFL. He's not fast enough to make a ton of plays, and you're not going to ask your quarterback to take a ton of hits like that when they can't be elusive like a guy like Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray is. So even though he was very good at it in college, it's going to be muted at the NFL level. In terms of his weaker traits, I hate to be that guy, but in terms of throwing the ball, his arm strength and his accuracy left a lot to be desired on both fronts. Not very consistent with his accuracy. I felt like he was solid in the intermediate range, but a lot of his deep passes were off the mark, and he just missed on the ball placement for a lot of short passes too. His overall completion percentage isn't horrible, but you need your quarterback at this level to be more consistent. His ball placement, like I said, not great. on short passes, which means he's not as accurate as he could be. And his arm strength is lackluster. He can get the ball down the field if he puts some air under it, but he doesn't have a great arm overall. A lot of times the receivers that are wide open have to wait for the ball to get there. He can't just gun passes all over the field. He has to loft them. It's very evident on quick screens and intermediate routes on the seams that he just can't zip the ball into beat coverage. It's not an adequate NFL arm. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. His other big weakness is his pocket presence. While it was a strength for Kyle Trask and a solid ability for Kellen Monde, this is a glaring issue for Sam Ellinger. Definitely his weakest area outside of his arm. He routinely makes the decision to tuck it and run when he doesn't have to. This leads to a lot of inopportune hits and includes a lot of plays where there was something to be had on a pass that he just simply bailed out of when he didn't have to. He bails when he shouldn't, and he doesn't have a good timer or detector when it comes to pressure. This is something that's pretty hard to teach, as we've learned as Steelers fans with watching Mason Rudolph. Rudolph is a guy that, despite playing a decent amount of snaps at the NFL level, still doesn't seem to get when to step up into the pocket, how to maneuver the pocket, when to pull the trigger, when to be a good anticipatory thrower. And it hasn't gotten a lot better. It's gotten a little better, but it's something that hasn't even been... It's not something I would call so bad that he can't be an NFL quarterback. I think that it's worse with Ellinger. So when you take all that into account, you're talking about a guy that could really struggle at the NFL level, even if he improves a lot here. So just to recap, I thought Ellinger's strengths were that he was a great leader at a well-respected program, a long-time starter with over 40 starts in games, only 21 turnover-worthy plays and just under 1,000 career snaps. He really took care of the football well. He uses the middle of the field effectively and often, and shows a willingness to take hits for the team. I saw his ceiling as a less athletic Seneca Wallace. A solid backup quarterback in the NFL for 11 seasons. That's a good NFL career. The cons, he's got a really below average NFL arm. His accuracy was not something he ever got better at, and missed way too many throws in terms of his ball placement. He's not as great of an athlete as he might think, so he can't lean on it the way Kellen Monde can. He regressed in 2020 after improving from 2017 to 2019, and his pocket presence is just abysmal. I see his floor as former backup quarterback Austin Davis, or rather a poor man's Austin Davis, if you will. He's projected as a 6th-round pick to a potential undrafted free agent. And my final thoughts on Ellinger is that he's the next in a long line of these college quarterbacks that produce a ton in college, but have trouble finding footing in the NFL due to talent level. Ellinger was a great leader at Texas for several years and was a winner. Did a great job of helping on the ground and contributing to his team's success while taking care of the football. Unfortunately, his arm just isn't good enough to win on a consistent basis, and definitely doesn't warrant being taken with a high draft pick. He can't hit targets in stride with regularity, and he can't zip the ball into targets in tight windows. When you combine that with poor pocket presence, you've got a tough argument to make for a guy ever being taken early, and let alone being taken at all. I think he could be a nice late-round flyer for a team looking to fill out a practice squad or bottom end of the roster type of guy. Could be a number 3 quarterback this season, but will likely need a season before he can be ready to challenge for a number 2 job, if that even happens. So that was Sam Ellinger. And of my 3 guys, I'm having a hard time ranking these guys. Kyle Trask was the guy I liked the most because he was the most impressive overall player. But I just don't think it makes sense for the Steelers to draft any of these guys. I liked what I saw the most from Trask, and I didn't from Ellinger. But, I mean, is that unfair? Ellinger doesn't have a lot of NFL traits. Trask has some, but is lacking physical tools. It's becoming more and more apparent that if you want a really good NFL quarterback, you are most likely going to have to either trade up or get one early. That being said, I appreciate what I saw from all three of these quarterbacks I've watched over the past couple seasons on tape and in games. And I hope they all have success at the NFL level. In the meantime, that'll wrap up today's episode, Season 6, Episode 8. If you have any questions about the show, please feel free to email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you as always for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.